Michel Foucault to the Berkeley History Department. It is, I think, perhaps particularly appropriate that the first of his discussion sections we held with historians, although it is true, of course, that he has fallen among philosophers, sociologists, and even literary critics. He is, of course, basically, first and foremost, an historian, a controversial one, an unorthodox one, but an historian nonetheless. And so I think it's indeed appropriate that we have him here today. Now, this is a very unstructured meeting, and he wants it to be as informal as I suppose we can make it. It's merely a discussion section, an opportunity to ask questions. Many of us have read his works. They appear with increasing frequency on our reading lists, and so there's no reason to assume that this is an uninformed audience. Let me, however, begin by at least breaking the ice by asking a fairly general methodological question, which concerns his historical work, and then perhaps this will lead to some more specific questions concerning the substance of it. Monsieur Foucault, the first question I'd like to put to you concerns the shift in the methodological focus of your work, which some people have perceived from the earlier archaeological perspective to what you have described since perhaps 1970 in the essay that you wrote on Nietzsche as a genealogical perspective. What I'd like to ask is this a significant and radical break in your work, or can we conceive of genealogy as basically similar to archaeology, merely moving from discourse to power and to apparatuses that are in a sense outside of discourse? Or are you really doing something very different? And if so, how would you describe the difference between archaeology and genealogy as an historical method?
Well, that's a good and hard question. I think that I use those two words in very different meanings and in order to indicate two different set of problems. I would say that when I use this word archaeological research, I wanted to differentiate what I am doing from both social history, since I don't want to analyze society, but facts of discourses. And I wanted also to dissociate this analysis of discourses of what would be philosophical hermeneutics or, that is something like the interpretations of what has been said through the deciphering of something which wouldn't have been said. And when I use this word archaeological research, I wanted to say that what I am dealing with is a set of discourses which has to be analyzed as an event or as a set of events. Something has been said, such and such things have been said, and in a way it is this kind of discursive events are events as any other events, but they are a spatial status, spatial effects, which are not similar to what can be, for instance, an economical event or a battle or something like that, or demographical change. So that's what I mean by archaeology. It is the methodological framework of my analysis. What I mean by genealogy is both the reason and the targets of analyzing those discourses as events. And it is what I am trying to show is how those discursive events have determined in a certain way what constitutes our present and what constitutes ourselves. Either our knowledge, our practices, our type of rationality, our relationship to ourselves or to the others. And that's the genealogy. So I would say that the genealogy is the finality of the analysis, and the archaeology is the material and methodological framework of the... Okay.
Would it then be fair to say that whereas the archaeology stresses the discontinuities between various discourses or epistemes, genealogy is much more interested in the subtle continuities and the ways in which the present is, in a sense, anticipated, perhaps, in the past?
Well, you see, I won't say exactly that. Well, the general theme of my research is history of thought. But how could we make the history of thought? I think that thought cannot be dissociated, of course, from discourses, and in a way we can't have any access to thought, either to our present thought, to the present, to our own thought, our contemporaries' thought, or, of course, thought of people in previous periods. We cannot have access to them, but through discourses, and that's the archaeological, the necessity of archaeological consideration. And that has nothing to do with continuity or discontinuity. You can find either continuity or discontinuity is in those discourses. For instance, now when I am looking in the history of the sexual ethics, I am obliged to recognize that you find exactly the same formulations concerning sexual ethics from the 4th century before Christ till now. The theory of marriage, of faithfulness, and so on, is the same, or at least from the first centuries of our era to now. So you have continuity. But in other systems of discourses, and for instance in scientific discourses, you find discontinuity. And that's something very striking in our culture and in this archaeological research, to see that in certain fields like ethics, you find such continuity during centuries and millenaries, and in science, some very quick changes, so drastic changes, for instance, that when you read a book of medicine of the beginning of the 18th century, you cannot often even figure out what they are speaking about. Which kind of disease is it? It's very difficult, and you need all the translation to understand what they are speaking about, which kind of disease, and so on and so on. But if you read a book written in the beginning of the 19th century, after Bichat, Laennec, and so on, even if you recognize that everything is wrong, you recognize very well what they are speaking about, and you can say if it is true or not. And for the books written, most of the books written down to the 18th century, the middle of the 18th century, you cannot even say if they are wrong or not, because it makes really no sense for us from the medical point of view. And so in this case, you have a very drastic change and a real discontinuity. But it's not at all a principle, a universal principle.
Let me just ask one more question, then open it up to the floor. You've just spoken about changes and discontinuities. I think one of the most frequently expressed responses, critical responses to your work in America, concerned the curious lack of explanation for change in the archaeological method. Things seem to replace one another, and you were generally less concerned with why they replaced one another than with the mere fact of the replacement. Now, has the genealogical method, as you've used it, paid more attention to the sources of changes, to the reasons why things have radically changed or remain the same for that reason? Or is this still an issue that is essentially bracketed in your work and not one of the central concerns.
Yes, and I am aware that I have not been clear enough about this problem of discontinuity, which is for me not very important. And once I remember I have read a very short notice about me, one line, and it was my name, philosopher of discontinuity. I think, and I have been struck, and really nobody has since now shown me that I was wrong on this thing, this topic. Is that when you look at the history of at least some of sciences from the end of the 16th century to the beginning of the 19th century, you see those very important changes either in medicine or in natural history or in economics and so on. And I put aside the problem of physics, for instance, or chemistry, in which you could find exactly, I think, those very dramatic changes. It's a fact, right? So this fact, of course, you could try to reduce them or to explain them by some change in society and so on. I don't think, and I never read nowhere any pertinent explanations of those dramatic scientific changes through correlative, parallel, and similar changes in society. And nobody had never convinced me that the changes in the capitalist society from the 17th century to the beginning of the 19th is a good explanation for the change from natural history of the 16th century to the biology of the 19th. But because I think that scientific thought as a type of historicity, I don't know if this word means something in English, a type of historicity, a type of change, a way of changing, which is quite specific and which has this kind of possibility of changing nearly everything at the same moment. Not only the possibility, but I should say the necessity. And it is that some of the main characteristics of the scientific thought, that it is a coherent thought. So that when something is changed, at a certain point, you are obliged to change other things. And of course, you have several levels of changes. And sometimes you can change only a concept, sometimes a theory, sometimes a pattern in the sense, the meaning of Kuhn, or sometimes you have to change more than a pattern, you have to change nearly everything, the objects, the theory, the field, the type of rationality, the pattern, the theory, the concept. And those dramatic changes in which nearly everything, the field, the objects, the type of rationality, you find it sometimes in history of science.